My name's Gabrielle, and I'm 18. And truth is, I haven't made it in any way, and I'm not an expert in any sport or any phenomenon or any field. So lots of you may be wondering why I'm here today. I'm not an expert in anything, but I am an expert in my ideas and my truths and my experiences. And that is why I stand before you today. So before I start, let me tell you how this all came to be. I was born in the Philippines, and I spent most of my life there. I was born in a city called Davao, and every year I go back, and I get to see my family, and I get to spend time with my friends. I also get to visit my old high school. And the first time I was there, it was the winter of my freshman year, and I got to see my old English teacher, and he gave me the chance to speak to his senior class. And I didn't know what to say. I had just started college 3 months before that, and it was a very odd place to be because just earlier that year, I was kind of friends with the students in his class, and I was wearing the same uniform, and essentially, I was one of them. So I told them words of encouragement and words of reassurance, the things that they wanted to hear, because I didn't want to scare them. But today, I think of what I would actually tell them. First, I would encourage them to immerse themselves in a new environment. Growing up in the more privileged part of town, the odds weren't necessarily stacked against me. And everyone kind of knew or knew of each other. But let me ask you today, does the name Gabrielle Presbitero ring any bells to you? Yeah, I didn't think so. So being in a new environment has afforded me the opportunity to carve an identity for myself, apart from whatever is expected of me, largely in part because there aren't any expectations. Next, I would encourage them to keep the culture of excellence alive. And I was raised to be an achiever. And that thirst, that will, that drive to succeed is such a big part of who I am. And back in my high school, it was my goal to be at the quarterly recognition program. And it was a program where medals and certificates were given out to students who excelled academically. And back in my time, it was held on a Tuesday morning where the students had to sit in front, the honor students had to sit in front, and the rest of the student body watched the program from a separate section. And it was this culture of competitiveness that drove me to achieve what I thought I couldn't. It brought out the best in me. But here's what I wouldn't tell them. First, I would say that sometimes the hardest person to convince that you belong and that you're deserving is yourself. Truth is, I didn't know what to do when I first started writing this TED Talk. I'm 18, and in the company of experienced professionals with revolutionizing ideas. And not being able to feed off the belief that other people had in me challenged my own self-belief. Next, I would say that the recognition you seek in your medals, in your trophies, in your certificates, yeah, these don't equate to a purpose that you serve. When I started college, I realized that these medals were the lifeline to my motivation. And when I began a life without medals, I was lost. And I knew I needed to work hard. But since these medals were gone, I had a very vague sense why. So, let me tell you this. As humans, it is in our nature to turn to something we can see or turn to something that we can feel to represent something we can't. And we zero in so much on who we want to be and what we want to achieve that we forget that the self-growth comes with the process. All my life, when I have faltered, I've always said, I did my best. And I've always treated that as a consolation. The afterthought to that was always, but it wasn't enough. In fact, I should have been saying this. I did my best, and it is through this failure that my best gets a little better. And that is not a consolation, but in fact, it is the prize. Thank you.